So to start off, so you have a context for this conversation, Praesidium is an abuse risk management company in Arlington, Texas. And so we work with organizations all across the United States and also internationally to help them protect the children and vulnerable adults that they serve within their organization from any kind of abuse, and then the staff and volunteers who serve them from any kind of false allegations. And so we've been doing this for over 20 years. We have over 4,000 clients, and we've reviewed well over 4,000 cases of abuse within organizations. And what we have done is we've used a methodology called root cause analysis to analyze those cases to determine how they occurred and to determine what the root causes were for those incidents. And so we have national partners with YMCA of the USA and Boys and Girls Club of America, American Camping Association, some very large social service agencies and other youth development agencies like camps, and we provide a wide variety of services for them, obviously some of which are background checks, but some of which are crisis management services. And so what that affords us is they send all of their cases of abuse through our office. And so we get probably about a case or two a day that we staff, we analyze, perform this root cause analysis, and it provides us with a big sample to look at and evaluate how these cases occur. And so based on what we have learned through those cases, we've developed a methodology to help organizations protect themselves, protect the children and vulnerable adults that they serve, as well as the staff and volunteers who serve them. And so what I'm going to do is start off and give you a little bit of a background in regards to the scope of the problem that we're dealing with. And so in the general population, when we look at it, it's estimated that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys will be sexually abused before they turn the age of 18. Any child or vulnerable adult that has any kind of disability, and so that could be someone with a developmental disability, it could be learning disability, it could be physical disability, or at a much increased or a higher likelihood of being abused. And then there are also a certain group of vulnerable populations that through an organization we put one person in charge of that other person, and they are also considered vulnerable to that extent. And then what we know is that 10% of school children will be sexually abused before they graduate, and that's sexually abused by a school personnel. So that does not include bullying, it does not include hazing, it includes staff members, volunteers, teacher, administrator, maintenance worker, coach, whatever it may be. And then while all of those numbers sound very bad, and they are, it's also estimated that 80% of the abuse actually goes unreported. And so there's just a lot of barriers for children or adults to report these types of incidents. And so the vast majority never reach us, and we don't have an opportunity to respond. What we also know is that the effects of this risk are tremendous. And so first and foremost, we know that the effects of abuse to children or vulnerable adults is pretty extraordinary. It's one of the worst incidents that can happen. But we also know, reviewing litigation, is that the effects when one of these types of incidents happens within an organization is severe to that organization as well. And so the risk and the effects of their name and their reputation gets damaged, and it's the most expensive risk that you have. And so the average award for an abuse incident within an organization is $500,000. That's higher than any other type of incident out there. So whether that's a trip and fall or workman's comp or whatever it may be, this would be the most expensive. And so then when we take a broad approach, we say after we reviewed over 4,000 cases of abuse, we have identified that there is not a single root cause. So there's not a silver bullet that we can just do one thing and prevent our children or vulnerable adult from being abused. But there's also not 4,000 reasons why this happens. And so what we've identified is that when we review these cases on a daily basis, there's 8 different ways that we see these types of incidents happen within organizations. And so what we have developed as the methodology we've used for 20 years is our safety equation. And so what you see in front of you are the 8 different areas that organizations need to evaluate in terms of their policies and procedures and practices to help protect the children and vulnerable adults that they serve and help protect their employees as well. And so we look at what kind of policies are in place to define appropriate and inappropriate boundaries. We look at how people are trained to identify warning signs and respond. How do we supervise our volunteers? How do we make it easy for people to report, and so on and so forth. And as you see here, one of the boxes is screening and selection. And so screening and selection plays a very important role. And so there are some individuals that have a history of acting inappropriately or breaking the law in the past. And there are things that we can identify within the screening process to avoid them from ever having contact to any of our clients to begin with. And so this is an important box, but what I'm trying to show here is it's not the only box. And so what we're going to talk about is there's limitations to background checks. And so they're very important. They're industry standards. We're going to learn, but it's not the end-all be-all. And so we can't assume just because we're doing background checks that we're having a completely safe environment. We have to pay attention to these other areas as well. And so diving right into background checks, the dilemma with background checks is that while we have to do them, and so going to the second bullet, why we must do them, we have to do them because if there's a case within our organization and we're going to be held or going to attempt to hold us liable, they're going to see if we tried to find any knowable information about that volunteer or that employee. And so the most common source of knowable, quote unquote, knowable information is a criminal history. That's public data, that's public information that anybody can go and look and pay a certain amount of money to go see. And so if we have a volunteer who has committed assault or is a sex offender, and we didn't pay whatever it may be, $12 or whatever type of search we are doing to find that, then the courts or a plaintiff's attorney is going to try to say that we were negligent in screening and selection. And so it's become an industry standard. Anybody who puts one person in charge of another is held to this standard now, whether you're a church, CASA, Habitat for Humanity, whatever you may do, it's industry standards. However, the dilemma, going to the first bullet, is we can't rely on them. And so the vast majority of sexual offenders do not have a criminal record. And so it's estimated that only 5% of sex offenders actually have a criminal record that we can find. And so while we can do it, while we have to do it, we can't always just assume that because we've done a background check, then we don't need to supervise properly or we don't need to do other things within the screening piece. And so what we also want to make sure of is, based on the level of access that your volunteers or employees may have, that there may be other things that we want to make sure that we're doing in the screening process, like having them submit an application, doing behavioral interviewing, checking their references. And so before we just talk about the last bullet, background checks, I do want to kind of point out that this isn't the entire screening process for some of your employees or volunteers who have higher access. And we'll help define higher access a little bit later. So the word background check in general is a very generic term. And unfortunately, it's not a simple process, and it's not a straightforward process of how someone defines a background check and what a background check is. And so there is not one data source that you can go to, that anybody can go to, that will include every every kind of record there is out there about an individual. So there's not one database. That's not included in the FBI database. It's not included in any database in any vendor search. And so what an organization has to do instead is look at the different types of databases and ask a vendor or ask whoever they're using to solicit certain types of information. And so we're going to talk about what that information is in a little bit, but I'll kind of talk about some key concepts here before we get to that. And so the first is that it's important to know that criminal records originate and are the most accurate at the county level. And so if you ran an FBI search, which most of you will not be doing, the FBI will actually get their information, will solicit their information from county level courthouses. And so if you want to get the most accurate, up-to-date information, you go to the county search. The problem with the county search is it's only for that county. And so if we just ran a county search on a volunteer or an employee, it would be the most accurate and up-to-date information for that county, but it's very limited in terms of its reach. And so if I live in Tarrant County like I do, but work in Dallas County, and you only checked a search in Tarrant County, but I committed a crime in Dallas County, you would not get that Dallas County conviction. And so while the county level information is the most accurate and up-to-date, the dilemma is that it's not the most broad, and we need to go broader than that. There is no perfect criminal record search, and so we're going to show you kind of a best practice search, but there are pros and cons for everything. And so there isn't one perfect search where you're always going to find everything. The key is to do your due diligence and to be able to show that you've done your due diligence to find as much as possible any knowable information, and so we'll talk about that as well. The type of search matters, and so what we'll see here is there's a lot of different types of searches out there, and so we want to make sure that we're doing the most comprehensive search, which would be the local county, but also the broadest search, which is what we're going to talk about as the multi-state search. And then there is no such thing as a truly national commercial criminal record search. So there's not one database that we can find. And so when we're doing the multi-state check that we're going to talk about, we're actually checking hundreds upon hundreds of databases in one search. And then the last piece is data sources matter. And so there are a lot of different vendors out there who do criminal background checks. And the very confusing thing for organizations is it's very hard to compare apples to apples from one vendor to the next. And so anytime you're selecting any vendor, whether it's us or anybody else, you'll want to ask about their data sources and see what kind of information they select from. And so we make a point to get the most up-to-date and the broadest and most comprehensive data sources that we can find. And there's other vendors who do the same. There are other vendors and sources out there that you will see advertised as very cheap, and they don't cost very much money, which can be very appealing. But when you scratch the surface and look at their data sources, it's very, very limited. And so it's very easy to pay $5 for that check and not get knowable information that you will be held accountable for later on. And so when you're looking at different types of background checks, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's all of your major checks. And so you'll see a lot of different options out there. You'll see an individual county records search. What that is you are searching just in one county. So it's Bexar County, Travis County. You're paying money to search just in that one county. Then there's single state criminal record search. And so in some states, it pays to just do a state search because it includes all of the counties in that search. Other states it doesn't pay to do that because they don't have a comprehensive record of those. And most vendors, us included, can let you know what states it's worth doing that in and what state it's not. The next search is called a multi-state criminal record search. And so our multi-state criminal record search includes data from every single state in the United States. However, some states report really good information, Texas being one of them. Other states in that multi-state report very poor information. It's barely anything. And so it's good search because it's very broad. And so you get every state, and you get a very wide selection. However, in some areas you're not getting very good information. It won't include any. Some areas won't include some very good county information. Other areas it does. And so what most vendors will do, us included, some not, is we'll send you that information so you can see what you get. And so if you have applicants coming out of Harris County or whatever it may be, you will see what level of information you receive. Then there's the National Sex Offender Registry search. That's a separate search than the multi-state criminal. And so a sex offender registry search is when someone has to register as a sex offender, then they will go into their state's database. And so you can run this search and find out if someone has actually registered as a sex offender. And then there's international searches. And so if you have someone coming in from Canada or whatever it may be, you can do those searches as well. And then what you'll see is there's specialized searches. There's what's called a Social Security number trace and an alias search. I'll explain that in a second when we talk about best practices. There's motor vehicle record search if someone's going to volunteer, an employee is going to be driving other people for your organization. There's license checks and education verifications. There's employment verifications. There's federal courts and county. There's credit checks and so on and so forth. And so overall what you try to do is you try to match those checks compared to what they'll be doing. So the easy example is if they're going to be transporting individuals, you would want to do a motor vehicle record search. If they're going to be handling finances, you may want to consider a credit check. And then we will help organizations kind of match who they're screening and what searches they should do. And so to try to make sense and make it as simple as possible, what we have here are general best practices. And so if you're talking about just screening any general volunteer or any general employee, overall, this is what the check should include. It should include a multi-state criminal record check, a national sex offender registry check, and then we recommend also a Social Security number trace and an alias check. And so I'll tell you what that does. When we run their Social Security number trace, it does two things. It will first identify whether that's a real Social Security number. And so some people, when they try to not put their information in and put someone else's because they know they have a criminal history, they will use a fake Social Security number. So first it will identify that as a real Social Security number. Next what it will do, it will identify if the individual has any aliases. And so why that's important is people go by other names, sometimes legitimately, sometimes not. But for example, if someone has been married recently, what the alias check will do, it'll pull up their current name plus their maiden name. And what our system will do is then run their maiden name through the multi-state National Sex Offender Registry check. So you will get two checks in one. You will get their current name as well as their maiden name, but you will only pay once. And so you'll only pay that one $12 fee that you'll see here in a little bit. And so that's become a best practice standard that we'll want to do that, a basic search. If you have employees or volunteers with higher level of access, we would highly recommend doing an individual county level check everywhere they've lived over the last 7 to 10 years, depending on where they've lived. And I'll explain, and we'll look at how we evaluate what's a high-level access position here in a second. And then the last best practice is for ongoing employees and ongoing volunteers, we highly advocate conducting annual to every 2-year checks, depending on what they do, to make sure that over the last 11 months or whatever it may be, there haven't been any other convictions that we need to know about or take seriously. And so how do we determine high access? First and foremost, please know that we will have a conversation with you about this. And so if you have any questions, you just call our safety analysts and we walk through, okay, what will they be doing? And we'll say, okay, industry standards will dictate that yes, this is high or this is low, whatever it may be, and here's what we recommend. But overall, here's the framework that we would use. And so we would ask the following 4 questions or use the following 4 criteria. What level of supervision does this staff or volunteer have? And so are they working alone with adults or children, clients, or will they always be working in groups that are always going to be supervised? Is this a one-time event, which I know a lot of yours may be, under frequency, or is it that they're going to have ongoing contact every week or every day? What is the duration? And so is this a weekend job, or is it going to be they're going to be with us for an employment or a year, whatever it may be? And then the last criteria is relationship. And so what we look for here is what type of relationship are they going to have with the children or the adults. And so are they going to be like mentors? That's a very intense relationship where there's going to be a lot more interactions, or is it just a more of a supervisory relationship where they're just driving someone from point A to point B? And so you think of a bus driver with children. They're not really there to get to know the children. They're not mentoring the children. They're not having personal conversations with them, and so that's a lower access position. But a mentor, a coach, a teacher, they get to know the child or adult. They have personal conversations. That's a higher access position. So when we look at our opportunities for volunteering or staff, this is the framework that we can help evaluate whether we should do that extra level check or not. The next section that I want to touch on is once you run a check, we have to be very methodical and very thoughtful in terms of how we use that information. And so the question becomes, if you run a check and there's a hit, how do we use that information to determine whether this person should volunteer or be an employee or should not? And there are both best practice standards that we need to follow, but also there are EEOC and FCRA guidelines that we need to follow. So there's federal guidelines that we need to consider. Now, when I talk about this now, this is not meant to be an end-all, be-all. If you use us for background checks, we will help you walk through this process. You can call us. We'll say, okay, this is the hit. What are they going to be doing? And so we'll provide any consultation you need for this. But I just wanted to bring this to your attention regardless of how you do your background checks, because this has been a hot topic over the last about year to 18 months. So there's been a lot of guidelines that have passed recently in regards to how we use this information. And so first we need to look at the type of hit that it is, and as you'll see here in a second, whether that's relevant to the position, how serious it is. Next, we want to, as much as possible, we advocate using more than one person to make a determination. So a small committee, 2 or 3 people, to look at these hits so we get more than one set of eyes on it. We want to consider what their job responsibilities are, and we want to make sure we're following any EEOC and FCRA guidelines. And so I want to quickly break down those so you see what is required for that. And so under EEOC, what we have to consider is that we are using the information that we receive in a very fair and systematic fashion. So we're applying the same criteria to everybody. We're not applying one set of criteria to one person, another criteria to another person. And they recommend we use a 3-factor test. So first, we have to look at the nature and gravity of the offense. And so is it a speeding violation versus murder or assault? And so you look at how serious it is. The next, you look at when did it occur? Did it happen 7 years ago, or did it happen 3 months ago? And then lastly, we look at how does that hit relate to what they're going to be doing. So for example, if you get a hit that was 2 years ago and it was a speeding ticket, or 3 months ago and it was a speeding ticket, or some kind of traffic violation, and they're never going to be driving anybody, and so driving is not related whatsoever to their volunteer experience or their employment experience, then you wouldn't say that would have a lot to do with what they're doing as a job. But if they do have a couple of speeding tickets and they are going to be driving, then that is relevant to the situation. And so you want to look and make sure that you can draw a very clear distinction of, we didn't hire this person because of this hit, and this hit was very related to this position. And so if there's any kind of assaults or any kind of child abuse, obviously there's a quick link that you can make in regards to the safety of your consumers and what they'll be doing. But there's a lot of other things that can come up that may or may not be, and you want to do it. Then what we want to do is do an individualized assessment. And so we want to give the candidate an opportunity to explain the nature of the offense in certain circumstances. And so you'll see that process here in a second. And then what's also important to note is EEOC does not make much of a distinction between volunteers and independent contractors. And so they do consider them employees for the purposes of EEOC and the FCRA. So just because they're volunteers doesn't mean we can skip this process. Under FCRA, there's a couple of things that we need to do when we run background checks. And so one is the applicant has to sign in disclosure and a consent form. And so there is very specific language that should be included in that, and that it has to be formatted in a certain way. And so if your consent form or disclosure is part of your application, that is against FCRA regulations. So there has to be certain language included within that disclosure and the consent form. Those need to be completely separate documents. And so there's certain criteria that you need to make sure that you're adhering to when you do that. Anybody who signs up with us, we provide you guys with the latest and greatest disclosure and consent form that's been updated based on all the legal requirements out there. And so you could use those samples if you just want to, if you don't have your own. And then if there's a hit, FCRA, if you're going to not hire someone because of a hit, FCRA requires you to do pre-adverse action and follow adverse action procedures. And so there's a very specific procedure you have to follow to inform that person that you're not hiring them because of that hit, and then they have a right to contest that. And so there's certain paperwork and forms that you have to actually send them that they have a chance to respond, and if they don't respond, then you can proceed. If they do respond, there's a process they can go through, and we help walk our clients through that. We have the letters you're supposed to use. We make it really easy. And so I just wanted to bring these two pieces up because there's been a lot of litigation around these two areas, and it's become hard for organizations to stay up to date. And these are things that you can follow up with your vendor, or we can help you out with as well. We have worked with Habitat Texas to develop a package at a reduced rate to help meet these industry standards and help provide the consultation. And so this is the package that you have available. And I also just want to point out that Praesidium is much more than a background check company. And so we've been running background checks for quite some time, but we're a much broader company than that. We help organizations manage the risk of abuse and false allegations. And so we have safety analysts on our team who are a mixture of attorneys, psychologists, licensed master social workers, a variety of disciplines, all master's level and above, and they provide consultation to our clients on how to manage this risk and how to handle background check situations. And so the difference between us and a background check company is we have a much broader perspective, and you'll deal with professionals who have helped organizations on a day in, day out manage these types of incidents and prevent these kind of things from happening. And so anytime you need any kind of consultation or any kind of assistance regarding background checks or the broader topic of creating policies or training or just protecting our children and volunteers, as a background check client, you have access to them. And so our expertise is far beyond many other organizations, just to the extent of what we do. And so when you are looking, or when you are going to be considering contracting with us, we have put together the package that is relevant to the best practice standards that we talked about. And so our Habitat package includes the Social Security trace and the alias search that we talked about, the multi-state criminal record search, the National Sex Offender Registry search, and then our multi-state search includes some county level data without doing a county check, but not all. And so it's not a county level search, but if you do one, we include a lot of counties in Texas within that search. And so you get county level information through the multi-state search. And we can send you guys a document if you would like that would include that information. If you have individuals who have quote unquote higher level of access, though, we do recommend that you run a separate county level search. So this doesn't take the place of that. But the standard package does include some county level searches, and it also includes a search of a number of terrorist databases, as well as some miscellaneous stuff that you'll see in regards to other types of crimes, drug crimes, and so on and so forth. And then our package does include any kind of post-check consultation to discuss red flags that you come up, discuss FCRA, EEOC concerns, and other abuse risk management questions that you may have. And then we've put this together at a discounted rate of $12. So what I'm going to do now is open it up to any questions or any general comments that we can help with. That may have come up. And then if anything you're not able to ask now or want to ask later, our contact information is here if you want to get started with our criminal background checking services or just want to ask general questions in regards to anything that was discussed today.
You are now unmuted.
And so we're going to unmute the phones, and if anyone has any questions, please let us know.
The lines are unmuted if anyone wants to ask any questions.
How long does it take to get the criminal background checks and all that stuff completed?
Sure. And so if you just run our Habitat package, typically those results will post in about an hour. They're very quick. The only exception to that is if you run a county level search. So if you do a high access employee or a volunteer and you have to run a separate county level search, then what we actually do is we send someone to the courthouse. And so some courthouses are not electronically hooked up yet, and so you can't just do it online. We have to send what's called a court runner out. And so those can take anywhere from 12 to 48 hours depending on the county. But if you just do our standard check, the one that's $12, it's very quick, and so it's almost within an hour. Okay.
Is the package that you've put together for Habitat, we're looking at them for potential homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that would be good for potential homeowners? And my second question for that is we have a lot of refugees that we have in our program. We have a lot of refugees that come into Amarillo, and would that be good for them? I saw that you said there was something about the Interpol check and things like that. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, and so yes, we could do these checks for homeowners, and so that would, and then our Habitat package would be good for that. For refugees, that would be an interesting one to look at. And so yes, it would include the Interpol, the terrorist database, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, and so we would get that. The consideration would be, would we want to run a separate international search for them? And so depending on what country, depends on how you can do a search in just about every country. However, some countries, as you can imagine, are a lot easier to do and a lot better than other countries. And so we probably want to do some individual consultation to say, okay, what country are they coming from? Let's look at what our data sources are there and what kind of check we can get from them.
Okay.
Good questions. Anything else? Well, okay. Well, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you in regards to these checks, and also to partner with Habitat Texas and work with you all in the future. If you have any follow-up questions, you have my email address in front of me and my phone number. You can call me or email me directly, and we're looking forward to working with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, for giving your time for that great presentation. And thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope you found it very useful. And you will be receiving a recording of this in your email either today or tomorrow whenever it gets done processing. And don't forget to check out the other webinars we'll be having and you can look at that on the habitattexas.org site under the calendar. And yeah, so thank you very much for attending again, and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.